A new beginning. Dr. Leo Marshall was known throughout St. Francis Hospital not only for his expertise as a top surgeon, but for his genuine compassion. His patients felt it, his colleagues respected it, and those who had worked under his guidance were inspired by it. Yet, as celebrated as he was professionally, Leo led a quiet personal life. At 48, his closest companions were his books, his classical vinyl collection, and the faint memories of a marriage that had faded away years ago. Leo's wife, Sophie, had left a decade earlier. After years of trying to start a family together, the strain had grown too great, and she ultimately sought a life that would offer her the family she wanted but hadn't found with Leo. He had let her go without protest, burying himself even deeper into his work, and each year had only made the emptiness feel more permanent. His patients became his purpose, the operating room his sanctuary. And though he never spoke of it, he had long ago resigned himself to a life without children. But all of that was about to change. One chilly November evening, Leo was completing his final rounds of the day, his mind already shifting to thoughts of a quiet night at home. He was about to clock out when a nurse, Ellen, caught his attention. "Dr. Marshall, we've just received a critical case in the ER, a car accident. It's not looking good for the parents, but there are 5 children involved." Ellen's face was grave. She knew Leo always stayed when he was needed, even at the end of a long shift. Leo nodded, slipping back into his professional mode as he approached the ER. There, he saw a chaotic scene. Doctors and nurses rushing, the faint cries of children, and 2 stretchers being wheeled away. He noticed 5 young boys huddled together near the wall, eyes wide with fear, confusion, and sadness. As he approached them, Leo's heart sank. The boys ranged in age, with the oldest looking no more than 13 and the youngest barely 4. Each wore expressions that hinted at an innocence abruptly broken by tragedy. The sight was unlike anything Leo had ever experienced, and without thinking, he crouched down to their level, his voice as soft as he could make it. "Hi there," he said gently, trying to catch the oldest boy's gaze. "I'm Dr. Marshall. You must be very scared right now, and I'm so sorry about that." The oldest boy looked at him, his dark eyes brimming with unshed tears, his lips pressed into a hard line, as though trying to show bravery. "I'm Jordan," he said in a voice that was surprisingly steady for someone who'd just lost everything. He then gestured to his brothers, who huddled close. "This is Isaiah, Malik, Caleb, and Micah." Leo nodded, giving each boy a reassuring look. "It's nice to meet you all," he said, as though they were in a much different setting. "I know this is a scary time, but you're not alone. We're all here to help." The hospital's social worker, Maria, joined them, her face somber as she whispered to Leo. "The parents didn't make it. We're working on finding the nearest relatives, but it's complicated. No family's been located so far." Leo's gaze flicked back to the boys, who were too shocked to process the depth of the loss they were experiencing. He felt an urge that was as alien as it was undeniable. He wanted to help these boys, not as a doctor, but as someone who could be a source of stability in the storm that had shattered their young lives. The following days passed in a blur. Leo visited the boys frequently, checking in on them, even though they were out of immediate medical care. Their fate hung in limbo as child services struggled to locate any family. Each day, Leo watched them as they tried to cope with the uncertainty, witnessing how Jordan, barely a teenager himself, had become a protector to his brothers. They looked up to him, leaned on him, and it was clear he felt the weight of that responsibility. After nearly a week, Maria approached Leo with an update. "Leo," she said, her voice uncertain, "the foster system will take them in, but given their ages, it's likely they'll be split up. I thought you should know." Leo's chest tightened. The thought of these boys, brothers, a family unit, being separated broke his heart. He'd seen the way they supported each other, filling the roles of parents and siblings in the face of loss. He couldn't let that bond be shattered. As he glanced across the cafeteria where the boys sat, all huddled together with that familiar look of uncertainty, he felt a surge of determination. "Maria," he said slowly, barely daring to believe his own words, "what if I were to foster them? Would the hospital allow that?" Maria looked at him in shock, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "It would be unusual, but given your background, I think it could be possible. You'd be giving them stability, Dr. Marshall. But are you sure?" Leo's response came without hesitation. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." It took weeks of paperwork, psychological evaluations, and interviews. But finally, on a crisp December morning, Leo brought the boys home to his large, quiet house on the outskirts of town. The drive was a mix of nerves and quiet anticipation, with each boy stealing glances out the window, no doubt wondering what awaited them. When they arrived, Leo opened the door and guided them inside. "This is your home now," he said, his voice full of a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "I know this isn't easy, but I want you to feel safe here. This house is yours too." The boys looked around, their expressions a blend of awe and caution. Jordan took it upon himself to inspect each room, ensuring it was safe for his brothers. Caleb found the library, his eyes lighting up as he scanned the shelves filled with books. Malik, with a shy smile, touched the piano in the living room, its polished keys gleaming in the winter sunlight. Micah and Isaiah clung together, their wide eyes taking in every detail, from the high ceilings to the framed paintings. That first night, Leo cooked spaghetti, one of the few meals he knew how to make. The boys were polite and quiet, eating carefully as though they were guests rather than family. Leo could see the hesitation in their eyes, the way they held back as though waiting for the other shoe to drop. In the days that followed, Leo found himself navigating the new world of parenthood. He adjusted to routines that included school drop-offs, meal planning, and late-night talks about everything from missing homework to new friendships. Each boy brought his unique personality into the house, adding laughter, energy, and a sense of life that Leo hadn't realized was missing. One evening, about a month after they'd moved in, Jordan found Leo in the kitchen washing dishes. "Dr. Marshall," he said, his voice hesitant, "I know you don't have to do this for us, but thanks for everything." Leo set down the dish, drying his hands before turning to the boy. "Jordan, you don't have to call me Dr. Marshall. You can call me Leo if you'd like, or, well, whatever you feel comfortable with." Jordan nodded slowly, his brow furrowing. "I'll think about it." From that night on, something shifted. Jordan began to relax, and as he did, so did his brothers. The house grew livelier with laughter, sibling squabbles, and stories of school. Leo found himself included in their jokes, their games, and their dreams. He was no longer just the man who had taken them in. He was becoming something more. As the winter months turned to spring, Leo realized he couldn't imagine life without the boys. Each morning, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about saving lives in the hospital anymore. It was about being there for these 5 young souls who had been thrust into his life when he least expected it. And although he hadn't yet spoken the words aloud, he knew he would never let them go. This was his family now, and he would do anything to keep it that way. But little did he know that their journey together had only just begun, and the challenges they would face in the coming years would test the strength of their newfound bond in ways he could never have anticipated. Trials and triumphs. The adjustment from a bachelor's life to one bustling with 5 boys wasn't easy, but Dr. Leo Marshall found himself embracing every chaotic moment. His once silent home was now filled with the noise of laughter, the patter of small feet, and occasional arguments over TV channels or video games. The boys, Jordan, Isaiah, Malik, Caleb, and Micah, brought a new purpose and joy to Leo's life, though raising 5 sons alone was far from simple. Leo quickly learned that each boy came with a story, a personality, and a vulnerability of his own. Jordan, at 14, had always felt the weight of being the eldest, and he struggled to let go of his role as protector. Isaiah, only a year younger, was quieter, spending hours with a sketchpad, lost in his imagination, often pulling back when life got intense. Malik, the middle child, was fiery and quick-witted, fiercely competitive on the soccer field, and determined to prove himself. Caleb, with his sharp mind and boundless curiosity, could often be found sneaking off with books far beyond his grade level. And little Micah, at just 6 years old, seemed to have boundless energy, a heart full of empathy, and a knack for finding his way into everyone's arms for a hug. Despite Leo's best efforts to provide a safe and loving home, there were hurdles. The trauma of losing their parents lingered in each of the boys in different ways, and Leo struggled to be both a father and a healer. Many nights, he found himself wondering if he was enough for them, if he could possibly fill the gaping void left by the loss of their parents. Their first big test as a family came just a few months after they moved in together. One evening, Leo was rushing to prepare dinner after a long day at the hospital. The boys were at the kitchen table doing homework, the younger ones arguing over the best way to solve a math problem, while Jordan sat in silence, furiously working on his own. Leo noticed the tension in Jordan's posture, the way his grip on the pencil was too tight. His brow furrowed deeply. Trying to lighten the mood, Leo joked, "Let's not fight math. Fellas, it's only going to make your brain smarter." Jordan didn't laugh. Instead, he muttered, "It's easy for you to say." Leo's smile faded. "What's that, Jordan?" Jordan dropped his pencil, his frustration spilling over. "You're a doctor, Ove. You know everything. You don't know what it's like for us. We're the charity case you took in. You wouldn't understand." The room fell silent as the other boys looked up, surprised by Jordan's outburst. Leo took a deep breath, reminding himself that Jordan was still a child, and the years he'd spent being the man of the house had left him with scars that hadn't healed. "Jordan," Leo said gently, sitting down across from him, "I don't want you to think of yourself or your brothers as a charity case. I'm here because I care about each of you. I don't expect you to be perfect. We're all learning together." Jordan's face softened, but he still looked down at his homework. Sometimes I feel like you don't get it, Dr. Marshall. You don't know what it's like to lose everything." The words hit Leo hard. He reached over, resting a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You're right, I don't know exactly what you've been through, but I do know what it's like to feel alone. I didn't have parents growing up either. I know it's hard to trust that things will be okay, but I promise you, I'm here to stay." Jordan nodded slowly, and Leo could see some of the tension in his face begin to ease. In the days that followed, Jordan grew more open, and he began to lean on Leo in ways he hadn't before, coming to him for advice or just a comforting presence when he felt overwhelmed. As the weeks turned into months, each of the boys began to settle into the rhythms of their new life. Leo enrolled them in activities suited to their personalities and interests, and he marveled at how quickly they found their places. Malik became the star of the middle school soccer team, his intense focus and drive catching the attention of his coach. Leo attended every game, cheering louder than anyone else. He watched as Malik, usually so guarded and serious, allowed himself to enjoy each victory and laugh alongside his teammates. Leo noticed the way Malik glowed when he saw him in the stands, knowing that someone cared enough to be there, win or lose. Caleb, with his voracious love for learning, would sneak into Leo's office late at night to borrow medical books and journals. One evening, Leo caught him with a thick anatomy text spread open on the floor, his little fingers tracing the illustrations. "You're a curious one, Caleb," Leo chuckled, sitting beside him. "You want to be a doctor someday?" Caleb's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Maybe. Or a scientist. Or maybe I'll write stories about doctors and scientists." Leo patted Caleb on the back. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." Meanwhile, Micah, the youngest, flourished under the care of his brothers and the routines Leo had put in place. Each evening, Leo made it a point to spend a few quiet moments with him, knowing that Micah still had nightmares and woke up crying. searching for the parents he could no longer remember clearly. One night, Micah crawled into Leo's bed, snuggling close. "Daddy," he whispered, a term he hadn't used before. "I'm happy here." Leo's heart swelled. "Unhappy too, Micah," he replied, stroking the boy's hair. He realized in that moment how deeply he'd fallen in love with each of them. Isaiah, with his quiet nature, often disappeared into his room with his sketchpad. One afternoon, while cleaning, Leo stumbled upon one of Isaiah's drawings. It was a beautifully detailed sketch of their family at the lake, a place they often went to escape the business of city life. In the drawing, Leo stood at the edge of the lake, arms open as the boys ran toward him, laughing. The attention to detail was stunning, from the expressions on each face to the gentle waves of the lake. Leo felt a lump form in his throat as he realized how much Isaiah saw him as a steady figure in their lives. One evening, while preparing dinner, Leo heard a knock at the door. He was surprised to find a woman with a clipboard standing on his porch, a representative from Child Protective Services. "Good evening, Dr. Marshall," she began, her expression friendly but professional. "I'm here for a scheduled welfare check on the boys. I hope that's all right." Leo invited her in, his stomach nodding slightly. While he knew he was providing the best life he could for the boys, the formality of a welfare check unsettled him. He guided her through the house, introducing each of the boys in turn. They all greeted her politely, and she took notes as they showed her their rooms, their shared study space, and the backyard where they often played. As she prepared to leave, she turned to Leo with a smile. "It's rare to see such a well-adjusted family," she admitted. "It's clear that the boys have a strong bond with you, Dr. Marshall. I just have one question. Do you plan to adopt them officially?" The question took Leo by surprise. Adoption had always been on his mind, but he hadn't yet broached the subject with the boys. He wanted them to feel secure and settled first, and the timing hadn't seemed right. But the thought of adopting them filled him with a profound sense of peace. "I hadn't decided yet," he replied, "but it's definitely something I want. These boys are family to me." She nodded, scribbling a final note. "Then you should know that the court will likely look favorably on an adoption petition. Given your background, the stability of your home, and the boys' clear attachment to you, you could make it official, Dr. Marshall." After she left, Leo stood alone in the doorway, watching the boys play soccer in the backyard. The thought of adoption lingered in his mind, warming him in ways he hadn't felt since his own parents passed away. Several days later, during a family dinner, he brought it up. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his fork, clearing his throat to gather their attention. "I wanted to talk to you guys about something," he began, looking around the table at each of their faces. "You know I love having you here. It's been the best experience of my life." The boys exchanged glances, unsure of where he was going. "I was wondering," he continued, "how you'd feel if we made it official, if I adopted you, if we became a family in every way." There was a moment of silence as the boys took in his words. Then Jordan's face broke into a wide grin, and he reached over to clap Malik on the shoulder. "You serious?" Jordan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You want to be our dad?" Leo nodded, smiling through the tears that filled his eyes. "Yes, if that's what you all want, I would be honored." Without another word, the boys rushed to him, each pulling him into a group hug, their voices overlapping with cries of yes and thank you. Leo held them close, feeling the warmth of their embrace and knowing that this was his purpose. His family was complete, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. In that moment, with his boys gathered around him, Leo Marshall realized that his life had changed forever. The trials they'd faced had only strengthened their bond, and he knew that as a family, they could weather any storm. An unexpected call. In the months following the adoption, Leo Marshall and his boys settled into their lives as an official family. The adoption ceremony had been simple but meaningful, with the boys dressed in matching suits, their eyes alight with excitement as they signed the papers that made them forever bound as a family. Leo had stood proudly beside each one, his heart full, a father in every sense of the word. With the weight of formalities lifted, their life blossomed into a warm, rhythmic routine. Leo's days were split between the hospital and home, where he spent his evenings cooking, helping with homework, or cheering on Malik from the sidelines at soccer games. Isaiah's art was gaining notice at school, Caleb was winning science fairs, and little Micah had become the favorite in his first-grade class, charming everyone with his big brown eyes and gentle nature. Jordan, meanwhile, had grown into his role as the eldest sibling, often helping Leo manage the younger boys and shouldering responsibilities with a maturity that went beyond his 15 years. However, just as Leo began to believe that he and his sons had found peace, life threw an unexpected twist his way. It was late one evening when Leo's phone rang, interrupting the quiet of his home. He was reviewing some medical cases in his study, the house silent as the boys had already gone to bed. The call came from a blocked number, and Leo nearly ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something compelled him to answer. "Dr. Marshall speaking," he said, his voice steady as he waited for a response. There was a pause, followed by the sound of a man clearing his throat. "Leo," came a deep, gravelly voice that sent a chill down Leo's spine. "It's been a long time." Leo sat up straighter, his heart suddenly pounding. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone sharper now, his instincts on high alert. The man on the other end chuckled darkly. "It's Daniel," he said slowly, letting the name hang in the air. "Your ex-brother-in-law. Surprised to hear from me." The name hit Leo like a punch to the gut. Daniel. It had been over a decade since he'd last spoken to him, and for good reason. Daniel was Sophie's younger brother, a man who had never approved of Leo and had a history with drugs, debt, and a long list of bad decisions. When Sophie had left, Leo hadn't hesitated to distance himself from her entire family. They had drifted out of his life with the same quiet departure Sophie had made, and Leo had been relieved. Yet here he was, calling out of the blue, and somehow Leo knew it couldn't be good. "What do you want, Daniel?" Leo asked, fighting to keep his voice calm. "Oh, nothing much," Daniel replied, his tone casual but laced with something sinister. "Just thought you should know I've been watching you. Interesting life you've got going there, Doctor. 5 new kids, a fancy job, big house. Life seems to have turned out well for you, hasn't it?" Leo felt his chest tighten. The idea of Daniel watching him, and the boy sent a shiver down his spine. "What are you getting at?" "Well, I've been in a bit of a rough patch," Daniel continued, ignoring Leo's question. "Got out of rehab a few months ago. Tried to get back on my feet, but you know, life's tough when you don't have a generous doctor in the family." Leo clenched his jaw, already feeling the direction this conversation was headed. "If you're looking for money, I'm not interested," he replied curtly, his patience wearing thin. "Money?" Daniel echoed, feigning surprise. "Oh, I wouldn't call it that. I'd call it compensation. After all, you've got quite a cushy life, don't you? Helping 5 boys who aren't even yours while your own family is struggling." The words hit Leo hard, striking a nerve. Daniel was trying to make him feel guilty, to manipulate him, and Leo's hand tightened around the phone as he forced himself to remain calm. "You and I both know I owe you nothing, Daniel," he said. "So if this is about blackmail or extortion, you can save your breath." "Oh, but Leo," Daniel replied, his voice lowering to a whisper, "I know things about you. And I know things about those boys, about their past. Secrets that might be a little unpleasant if they were to come to light. You'd hate to see that, wouldn't you?" Leo felt his blood run cold. How much did Daniel know about the boys? Had he been following them, digging into their past? He knew Jordan and his brothers were vulnerable, especially given their history in foster care and the trauma of losing their parents. He had worked so hard to provide them with a sense of stability and love, to make them feel safe. He wouldn't let Daniel destroy that. "What exactly are you threatening me with, Daniel?" he demanded, his voice steely. Daniel laughed again, the sound chilling in its menace. "Nothing too serious," he said with feigned innocence. "Just a friendly suggestion that we meet up to discuss this like two reasonable men. Tomorrow noon, at the Blue Ridge Cafe downtown. Let's talk this over. Bring your checkbook." Before Leo could respond, Daniel ended the call, leaving Leo alone in the quiet of his study, his heart racing. For a long time, he sat there in silence, replaying the conversation in his mind, trying to process what Daniel could possibly know. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. This was a man who had no boundaries, who would do anything for money, and he would stoop to any level to get what he wanted. But even as fear gripped him, Leo felt a surge of resolve. He wouldn't allow anyone to harm his family, least of all a man like Daniel. He would go to that meeting, and he would make it clear that his sons were off limits. The next morning, Leo tried to carry on as if everything were normal, but a heaviness lingered in his chest. During breakfast, he watched his boys laugh and joke, oblivious to the threat that loomed. Jordan noticed his tension, though, and gave him a questioning look. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked quietly, his face full of concern. Leo forced a smile, ruffling Jordan's hair. "I'm fine, son. Just a long night." Jordan didn't look entirely convinced, but he let it go. As the boys finished breakfast and prepared for school, Leo found himself silently promising them that he would handle whatever was coming. They had already faced enough hardship in their lives. He wouldn't let anyone disrupt the peace they'd found. At noon, Leo arrived at the Blue Ridge Cafe, a quiet spot on the edge of downtown. The place was nearly empty, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. He spotted Daniel immediately, a shadowy figure hunched over in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee with a smirk on his face as he watched Leo approach. "Leo," Daniel greeted, his voice dripping with mock warmth. "Glad you could make it." Leo slid into the seat across from him, keeping his expression guarded. "Let's get to the point," he said firmly. "What do you want?" Daniel leaned back, his eyes gleaming with malice. "What I want is simple," he replied. "I want a piece of your perfect little life. A monthly stipend, let's call it. 1,000 should do, but I could settle for more." Leo felt his jaw clench. "And if I refuse?" Daniel's smile widened. "Then maybe your sons learn about their dear old dad's involvement in some questionable hospital cases." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think they'd still want to live with you if they thought you had skeletons in your closet?" Leo's hands balled into fists under the table. He was ready to stand his ground, to tell Daniel he wouldn't be manipulated. But before he could speak, Daniel dropped his voice, his tone darkening. "Or maybe I'll pay those boys a visit myself. It'd be a shame if something happened to them, wouldn't it?" The threat was clear, and it was enough to make Leo's blood run cold. He looked Daniel in the eye, his voice low but filled with barely restrained anger. "You go anywhere near my sons, and I'll make sure you regret it. I'll involve the police if I have to." Daniel chuckled, unfazed. "Go ahead. But we both know that'll only make things messier. Let's keep this civil, Leo. Just a few payments, and I disappear. Everyone wins." Leo knew he was trapped. He could refuse, but Daniel wouldn't back down. He would keep coming, keep threatening, until he got what he wanted. Leo had to think of his sons. He couldn't let them be hurt or scared, especially by a man like Daniel. With a heavy heart, he nodded. "Fine. I'll make the payments," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Satisfied, Daniel leaned back, raising his coffee in a mock toast. "Smart choice, Leo. Real smart." As Leo left the cafe, he felt a deep sense of dread settle over him. He had kept his sons safe for now, but he knew this wasn't the end. Daniel would be back, and he would demand more. For the first time since adopting the boys, Leo felt the weight of fear pressing down on him. He didn't know how he would protect his family from this shadow from his past, but he knew he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. Later that evening, he watched his sons around the dinner table, feeling an overwhelming love for each of them. They laughed and teased each other, unaware of the burden he carried. Leo promised himself he would find a way out of this. He had fought too hard for this family to let anyone tear it apart. But deep down, he knew that to protect his sons, he would have to face his past and Daniel's threats head on, facing the past. The days that followed the meeting with Daniel felt like a balancing act for Dr. Leo Marshall. He returned to his routine, going through the motions of the hospital and at home, but his mind was in constant turmoil. He kept replaying Daniel's threats, wondering just how much leverage his estranged brother-in-law truly had. Leo knew he had to keep Daniel at bay, yet he couldn't bring himself to tell his sons about the man lurking in the shadows. How could he burden them with his past, especially when they had only just found stability? The days wore on with Leo trying his best to keep his worries hidden. But Jordan, perceptive as ever, grew more and more suspicious. One evening after the boys had gone to bed, Leo sat in his study, reviewing notes from a difficult surgery he'd performed that day, when he heard a knock at the door. Looking up, he saw Jordan standing in the doorway, his face serious. "Dad," he began, his voice hesitant. He only called Leo Dad in private moments, and Leo's heart squeezed with both pride and concern. "I know something's bothering you, and it's not just work. You're different lately." Leo sighed, setting down his papers. He had always encouraged the boys to be honest with him, yet here he was, hiding the truth. "Come in, Jordan," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. As Jordan took a seat, Leo took a steadying breath. "There is something going on," he admitted, "but I didn't want to worry you and your brothers." Jordan's brow furrowed, and he leaned forward. "I'm not a kid anymore, Dad. You can talk to me." Leo hesitated, torn between wanting to shield him and recognizing the maturity in his son's gaze. Finally, he nodded. "There's someone from my past who's recently come back into my life. He's troubled, and he's asking for things that could cause a lot of problems." Jordan's face hardened. "What kind of problems?" Leo chose his words carefully. "Financial problems. He's demanding money and threatening to make things difficult if I don't give in." Jordan's expression shifted from concern to anger. "Is he blackmailing you?" he asked, his voice rising. "That's illegal. We should go to the police." "It's not that simple," Leo said, holding up a hand to calm him. "This man knows things. He's aware of details about your mother and my past that could affect our family. He could make things difficult for all of us." Jordan sat back, crossing his arms. "But that's not fair. You've done everything for us. He doesn't have the right to do this." Leo nodded, grateful for Jordan's fierce loyalty. "No, he doesn't. But I have to handle this carefully. If I go to the police, he might retaliate in ways that would hurt you and your brothers. I don't want you to worry about this, Jordan." Jordan looked away, frowning. After a moment, he turned back to Leo, his jaw set with determination. "Well, I'm not going to just sit back and do nothing. Let me help. You've helped us in ways I can't even explain. I want to do the same for you." Leo felt a lump in his throat at Jordan's words. "Just knowing you're here and that you trust me is more help than you know," he said quietly, patting his son's shoulder. "I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to protect this family." Jordan nodded, a flicker of doubt still lingering in his eyes, but he let the matter rest for now. Leo watched him go, realizing that he could only keep the full truth hidden for so long. He would need a plan to free his family from Daniel's grasp, and soon. In the following days, Leo carefully monitored his finances, transferring small amounts to Daniel, while trying to avoid drawing suspicion from anyone at work or home. But he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Daniel's demands were escalating, and with each call, Leo could feel the situation spiraling further out of control. One rainy afternoon, Leo returned home after a long shift, drained from a complicated surgery. As he entered the house, he was met with the scent of fresh-baked cookies, and he smiled despite himself. Emily, the boy's new babysitter and a longtime family friend, had been a godsend. She had been a nurse at the hospital before retiring, and she treated the boys like family, often stopping by even when she wasn't needed just to help or share a meal. "Emily, those smell amazing," Leo said as he shrugged off his coat. She turned from the oven, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, I had some eager helpers," she said, nodding toward the boys who were busy decorating cookies with frosting and sprinkles. Micah looked up, his face smeared with a bit of blue icing. "Dad, we're making cookie monsters. See." He held up a cookie, and Leo chuckled. "They look great, buddy," Leo said, ruffling his hair. But even as he enjoyed the warm scene, Leo noticed that Jordan was absent from the kitchen. His stomach twisted as he glanced at the stairs, wondering if his conversation with Jordan had affected him more than he'd realized. Later that night, after Emily had gone home and the younger boys were asleep, Leo found Jordan in the backyard, staring up at the stars, his face a mix of anger and sadness. Leo joined him in silence, allowing the quiet to settle before speaking. "Jordan," he began gently, "I can see you're upset. Talk to me." Jordan crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. "It's just not fair," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You took us in, gave us a family, and now this guy is trying to ruin everything." Leo placed a reassuring hand on Jordan's shoulder. "It's hard, I know. But sometimes, doing the right thing means facing challenges we didn't expect. And no matter what happens, I won't let anything tear this family apart." Jordan sighed, nodding slowly. "I just wish there was something we could do." "Sometimes patience is the best thing we can do," Leo replied, though he knew deep down that patience wouldn't be enough. Daniel wouldn't stop until he had bled Leo dry. He needed to confront Daniel in a way that would end this for good, but he didn't yet know how. As the weeks passed, Daniel's calls became more frequent, each one chipping away at Leo's patience and resolve. But one evening, a particularly unsettling call changed everything. Leo was at home, going through the boys' homework when Daniel called. "Leo," Daniel's voice oozed through the phone, cold and calculating. "I need a bit more than our usual arrangement this month. I've hit some unexpected expenses, and I figured a generous doctor like you could handle it." Leo's patience snapped. "Daniel, this has to stop. You're not getting another cent from me." "Oh, really?" Daniel replied, unfazed. "Well, maybe the boys would like to know what their dad is hiding. I've got stories, Leo, and I've got pictures. I could ruin everything you've built." Leo's hand tightened around the phone, his voice low with fury. "Don't you dare come near my family." Daniel laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "Try me." The call ended, and Leo's heart raced with a mixture of fear and anger. This was it. He could no longer dance around Daniel's threats. He had to protect his sons, and that meant facing his past head-on, even if it meant exposing everything. That night, after a long internal battle, Leo decided it was time to tell the boys the truth. He gathered them in the living room, taking a seat on the edge of the couch as they watched him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Boys," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. It's about someone from my past who has recently come back into my life. A man named Daniel." As he explained the situation, the boys listened in silence, their faces a mix of shock and anger. He told them about Daniel's threats, about the money he had been forced to send, and about the choices he had made to protect them. "I didn't tell you sooner because I wanted to keep you safe," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I see now that I can't handle this alone. I need your support. We have to face this together." Jordan spoke first, his voice firm. "Dad, we're not letting him do this to you. To us. We're a family, and no one's going to tear that apart." The others nodded in agreement, their faces fierce with determination. Malik clenched his fists, saying, "I'll do whatever it takes. He's not going to mess with our family." The unity in their faces, the strength in their eyes, filled Leo with a renewed sense of hope. They would face this together, and that meant they had a chance. Over the next few days, the family formed a plan. They pooled their resources, each boy contributing in their own way. Jordan, with his newfound legal knowledge from his internship, reached out to contacts in law. Caleb, the natural researcher, started digging for anything they could use against Daniel. Isaiah channeled his creativity into designing a narrative that would capture the truth about their family, showcasing the love and resilience that bound them together. Together, they created a detailed report, combining testimonies from friends, neighbors, and former colleagues who could attest to Leo's character. They documented every call and threat from Daniel, piecing together a case that showed his repeated attempts at manipulation and extortion. The night before they planned to confront Daniel with their findings, the family gathered for a quiet dinner. Leo looked around the table, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. No matter what happened, they had faced this challenge as a family, and they had proven their strength together. The next morning, Leo went to meet Daniel one final time, his heart steady, his resolve unwavering. He walked into the meeting with the support of his family behind him, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had already won in the ways that mattered most. Together, they would find a way forward, proving that love and resilience could outshine any darkness from the past, united as one. The night before the final confrontation with Daniel, Dr. Leo Marshall lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling as his mind raced. Though he had reassured his boys and fortified his resolve, the reality of facing Daniel was unsettling. But the courage his sons had shown fueled his determination. Each of them had rallied around him, lending their strength and support in ways he hadn't anticipated. In them, he found not only the purpose to endure, but the belief that they could overcome this darkness together. The morning dawned quietly, but Leo felt a palpable energy in the house. His sons had already gathered in the kitchen, each moving with a seriousness that reminded him just how much they'd grown. Jordan was reviewing the notes he prepared, his face set in a determined scowl, while Caleb had organized a file with every scrap of information they'd uncovered on Daniel. Malik and Isaiah sat at the table, their expressions mirroring each other in intensity, and little Micah, sensing the gravity of the day, tried to bring some comfort by serving everyone breakfast, something simple he could do to help. "All right, everyone," Leo began, sitting down with them. "We're meeting Daniel at noon. This is our last chance to settle this before we involve the authorities." Jordan looked up from his notes, his face fierce with resolve. "Dad, we've got this. Daniel can't do anything to us anymore. We have the truth on our side." Leo nodded, pride swelling in his chest as he met each of their gazes. "You're right. We've prepared as much as we can, and no matter what happens today, we're stronger because we're together." After a few moments of silence, Leo stood, and the boys followed him out to the car. Their presence gave him a newfound confidence, and as they drove toward the agreed-upon meeting spot, Leo felt the last remnants of his fear melting away. The cafe where they'd agreed to meet was one of the oldest in town, tucked into a quiet corner of downtown. The decor was cozy, with faded paintings on the walls and an assortment of mismatched chairs that gave it a vintage charm. But as they stepped inside, the quaint atmosphere did nothing to soothe the tension crackling in the air. Daniel was already there, seated at a table near the back. His posture was slouched, and he wore a smirk that spoke of misplaced confidence. He watched them approach, his eyes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and irritation when he noticed Leo's sons behind him. "Ah, Leo," Daniel drawled, stretching his arms across the table as they took their seats. "Brought the whole family, huh? I wasn't expecting an audience." Jordan glared at Daniel, unfazed by the condescension in his voice. "We're here because we want to make something clear," he said, his voice steady and firm. "You're not going to threaten our father anymore." Daniel's smirk faded slightly, replaced with a glint of irritation. He turned back to Leo. "So this is what it's come to. You're hiding behind your kids now." Leo felt a surge of anger, but kept his tone calm. "Daniel, I'm done with your games. We have everything we need to expose you for what you are, a liar and an extortionist. So if you want to keep going down this path, just know that we're ready." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with, Leo. You might have a pretty little file and some accusations, but I have stories that can ruin you. Stories that your sons here would be very interested to hear." Malik leaned forward, his voice cold. "We don't need to hear your lies. We know our dad. We know what kind of man he is." Daniel scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. You think just because he adopted you that he's some kind of saint? People like him, they're all the same. Self-righteous, thinking they can do no wrong." Isaiah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, his tone unwavering. "He saved our lives. You don't get to come in here and try to tear him down. Not after everything he's done for us." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Daniel's face. He looked from one boy to the next, realizing that his usual tactics were falling flat. Leo saw the shift and seized the opportunity. "Daniel, it's over," he said, his voice low but resolute. "You don't have any power here. You've spent your whole life trying to manipulate and use people, but you've underestimated this family. We're not just individuals. You're dealing with all of us. Together." Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He shot Leo a glare full of hatred and something else. Fear. The boy's unyielding loyalty, their unified front, seemed to shake him more than he had expected. He was losing control, and he knew it. In a last-ditch effort, Daniel sneered, leaning back in his chair with a false air of confidence. "Fine, you want to play this game. Go ahead and try. But I have ways of making your lives miserable. Don't forget I know people, and I know how to make problems disappear." Leo's gaze hardened. "We're prepared to go public with everything. We have records, your calls, your threats, all documented. So go ahead, make your threats. But just know that any action you take will come back to you tenfold." Daniel's face twisted with rage, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over, Leo," he spat, his voice shaking. "You may think you're safe now, but people like me, we always find a way." With one last furious glare, Daniel stormed out of the cafe, leaving the Marshall family in stunned silence. Leo watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering unease. Daniel's threats echoed in his mind, but he knew they had won the battle. His sons had stood by him, and their unity had driven Daniel away. Back at home, the tension slowly lifted as the family settled back into their routine. Days turned into weeks, and the shadow of Daniel's threats gradually faded. They celebrated their victory in small ways: family game nights, dinners filled with laughter, and quiet evenings where Leo found himself marveling at the strength his sons had shown. However, despite their success, Leo couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business. Daniel was gone, but his words lingered in Leo's mind. "People like me, we always find a way." He worried that Daniel might return, or worse, that he would try to harm the boys in some way. But as time passed without any sign of Daniel, Leo allowed himself to relax, reassured by the knowledge that they had prepared as best as they could. One evening, months after their confrontation, Leo received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Daniel's lawyer, informing him that Daniel had been arrested for attempting to defraud multiple individuals, some of whom had filed charges against him. Leo read the letter in silence, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Daniel would be behind bars for a long time, and his family was finally safe. That night, Leo gathered the boys in the living room to share the news. As he finished reading the letter, they erupted into cheers, the relief palpable. "See," Jordan said, grinning, "we told you we'd handle it together." Leo pulled each of them into a hug, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had weathered the storm, and the experience had only brought them closer. In the weeks that followed, life at the Marshall household returned to normal. Leo marveled at how his sons had grown, each of them carrying the lessons of their shared journey with a newfound resilience. Jordan became more confident, his natural leadership blossoming as he began to think seriously about his future. Malik, whose love for soccer had only deepened, was now the team captain and known for his fierce loyalty to his teammates. Caleb had taken his love for science further, diving into projects with an intense curiosity, while Isaiah continued to find solace in his art, his drawings now reflecting the family's triumphs and struggles. And Micah, sweet and sensitive, had become the glue that held them all together, his laughter and love a constant reminder of the family they had fought to protect. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Micah raised his glass of apple juice in a toast. "To family," he said, his voice full of pride. "No matter what." The boys clinked their glasses together, their faces shining with joy and a sense of belonging that went beyond words. Leo watched them, feeling an overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. It hadn't been easy, and they had faced trials that would have torn many families apart. But through it all, they had stayed united. After dinner, as they cleaned up and settled in for the evening, Leo sat in his armchair, reflecting on how far they had come. He knew that life would continue to throw challenges their way, but he also knew that they could handle anything as long as they had each other. In that moment, he realized that he had found something far greater than he had ever imagined. He hadn't just adopted 5 boys. He had found a family, a reason to keep fighting, and a purpose that filled every corner of his heart. As he watched his sons laughing and joking together, Leo knew, without a doubt, that he would do it all again. For this family, for these boys who had become his world, he would face any threat, overcome any obstacle, and stand by them forever. Because they were more than a family. They were united as one. A stronger bond. Months had passed since Daniel's arrest, and the Marshall family had settled back into their routines with a renewed sense of peace. Life had regained its rhythm, each day a testament to the resilience they'd developed through their trials. Leo Marshall marveled at how his sons had flourished, each of them growing into confident, compassionate young men who carried the hard-won lessons of their shared journey. The days slipped into seasons, and as the family moved through the final years of high school for some, and the beginning of middle school for others, Leo found himself taking quiet pride in the milestones they each reached. One spring morning, Leo stood at the kitchen counter, flipping pancakes while Micah sat on a stool, watching his father with wide eyes. "Dad," Micah asked, his voice thoughtful, "when are we going to take that camping trip?" Leo looked down at his youngest son and chuckled. The camping trip had been on their family list for over a year, but between school, work, and the lingering challenges of the past, they hadn't yet managed to make it happen. The idea of an outdoor adventure appealed to them all, a chance to escape their routines, enjoy nature, and celebrate how far they had come. "You know what, Micah?" Leo said, a smile spreading across his face. "I think it's about time we make it happen. How about next weekend?" Micah's eyes sparkled, and he practically leaped off the stool, running to tell his brothers. Moments later, the entire kitchen was buzzing with excitement as the boys discussed their plans, listing out everything from tents and sleeping bags to marshmallows and fishing rods. As the week passed, Leo felt a renewed energy sweep through the house. They shopped for supplies, making endless lists of food and essentials, each boy assigning himself a task. Jordan volunteered to handle the maps and planned their route with meticulous care. Malik, with his adventurous spirit, took charge of the hiking gear, already talking about the best trails and the views they'd see. Isaiah, always the creative one, packed his sketchbook and pencils, eager to capture the beauty of the forest. Caleb, the ever-curious scientist, filled his backpack with field guides and magnifying glasses, prepared to study every insect and plant they encountered. And Micah, young but enthusiastic, made sure they had plenty of snacks and marshmallows for roasting. Finally, the weekend arrived. Leo loaded their gear into the car with the boys' help, each of them vibrating with excitement. They piled into the vehicle, laughter and anticipation filling the air as they set off for the campsite. The drive took them out of the city and deep into the rolling hills and towering trees of a national forest reserve a few hours away. By the time they arrived, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm golden light over the campground nestled beside a sparkling lake. "All right, team," Leo announced as they unloaded the car. "Let's set up camp." The boys sprang into action, setting up tents with surprisingly little bickering. Jordan and Malik took charge of staking down the tents, their movements practiced and precise, while Caleb and Micah rolled out sleeping bags and unpacked their supplies. Isaiah took a moment to walk to the lake's edge, the glint of excitement in his eyes as he took in the landscape. Once the tents were up and their campsite was set, Leo gathered them around. "I thought we could make this trip memorable by each of us sharing something we've learned this past year, something we want to carry forward with us." The boys exchanged glances, each of them looking thoughtful. Leo began, his voice soft but steady. "I've learned that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about choice. Every day, I choose to be here with each of you, to do my best to be the father you need. And that choice, it's the best one I've ever made." They sat in silence, absorbing his words. Finally, Jordan spoke, his voice calm and filled with a depth that surprised even Leo. "I learned that I don't have to carry everything by myself. I'd spent a long time thinking I had to be the strong one. But being here, having all of you, I realized it's okay to lean on people. I'm stronger because of you guys." Isaiah, always introspective, added his own thoughts. "I used to feel like I had to hide things, like my art, or even my feelings. But being in this family has taught me that I can be myself, that I don't have to pretend. And that's freeing." Malik, usually quick to joke, spoke with surprising earnestness. "I've learned that when things get tough, we don't give up on each other. I used to think that you just had to tough things out on your own. But you guys showed me that sometimes sticking together is the strongest thing you can do." Caleb, who had grown quieter in the past months, finally spoke, his voice filled with pride. "I learned that I don't have to know everything to be happy. Being with you guys, I feel like I belong, even when things are uncertain. And that's more important to me than knowing what's next." Micah, with his innocent heart, smiled at his brothers and Leo. "I learned that love makes everything better. I love all of you, and I'm glad we're a family." Leo's heart swelled as he listened to them, each of their words affirming the journey they had taken together. As the sun began to set, they moved to the lake's edge, where they built a campfire. The flames danced in the evening light, casting warm shadows across their faces as they roasted marshmallows, told stories, and laughed. That night, under a sky studded with stars, Leo lay in his tent, listening to the gentle sounds of his sons sleeping beside him. The sense of peace he felt was indescribable. He knew, without a doubt, that they had come through the storm stronger than ever, and that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and the boys awoke with renewed energy. After a quick breakfast, they set out on a hike, their laughter echoing through the forest as they raced along the trails. Leo watched them with a mixture of pride and awe, marveling at how effortlessly they supported each other, lifting one another up even in the smallest of ways. Malik would offer a hand to Micah as they climbed over rocks, while Jordan helped Caleb identify the different plants they encountered. Isaiah took breaks to sketch the towering trees and the shimmering lake, capturing the beauty of their surroundings with an artist's eye. At the top of a hill, they paused to catch their breath, taking in the stunning view of the valley below. The boys fell silent, each of them awed by the expanse of greenery stretching out beneath them, the landscape alive with the colors of spring. "This is amazing," Caleb whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Leo placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. It is, isn't it? It reminds me that life is full of beauty, even after hard times. We just have to keep moving forward. They stayed there for a while, savoring the moment, before making their way back down the trail. The rest of the day passed in a blissful blur, filled with laughter, adventure, and the kind of memories that would stay with them forever. That evening, as they gathered around the campfire once more, the boys grew quiet, each of them lost in thought. Jordan broke the silence, his voice filled with emotion. "Dad, I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for this trip, but for everything. For choosing us." The other boys nodded in agreement, their expressions mirroring Jordan's gratitude. Leo looked at each of them, his heart overflowing with love. "I should be the one thanking you. You've all taught me more about love, resilience, and family than I ever thought possible. Being your father has been the greatest honor of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling as the stars began to fill the sky. For the first time in years, Leo felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He knew that this was just the beginning of their journey, but he also knew that, together, they were unstoppable. As the fire burned low, Micah leaned his head against Leo's shoulder, his eyes half closed. "Dad, can we do this every year?" Leo smiled, wrapping an arm around his youngest son. "Yes, Micah. Every year for as long as you want." They stayed like that, basking in the warmth of the fire and the comfort of each other's presence, until one by one, they drifted off to sleep. The forest wrapped around them like a protective embrace, the stars shining down as if to bless the family that had been forged through love, loyalty, and unwavering resilience. Together, they had faced the darkest challenges, and together, they had emerged stronger than ever. Whatever the future held, Leo knew that they would meet it as they always had, united as one, bound by the unbreakable bond they had built. And as he closed his eyes, Leo felt a profound sense of gratitude, knowing that he had found not only his purpose but the family he had always longed for.